America is supposed to be about freedom and options, and yet when it comes to transportation, we're all subservient to the automobile industry, and we have moved away from fundamentals of urban planning, which is you give people options. And if you live in the suburbs, if you live in the exurbs, if you live even in an urban neighborhood, and the only way you have to get around, to get to the grocery store, to get to the doctor, is a car that you pay for, and there are no other options, then your city and the federal government have failed you.
We're here in Manhattan with Danny Harris, the Executive Director of Transportation Alternatives, talking about biking, walking, public transit, or walking, biking, public transit.
All of them.
All of it.
And as it's New York, you have to be louder than everything else for anybody to hear you, which is a great way to talk about advocacy in this town.
If you enjoyed Central Park without cars, or enjoying some of the bike infrastructure that's around the city, this is part of who to thank. Danny's been doing this work for several years, and Transportation Alternatives been doing this work since 1972.
50 years, we're 50 years young. I mean, we're riding on the First Avenue bike lane, which is really a massive endeavor to start to bring north-south bike lanes in Manhattan. And it seems simple when you look at it, but when you talk to the people who are on the front lines of doing it, these projects are so infinitely complicated.
I mean, on this block alone, there's 5 bicyclists.
You know, we're on bikes, but we're not actually really talking about bikes. This infrastructure makes the city better for everybody. It makes it safer for you, it makes it better for your air, and also just more wonderful. We don't all have to live in a huge car sewer. There are other options, no matter where you live.
Thank God. So is it actually a 10-year anniversary of no cars in the park?
It took 40 years to get cars out of Central Park and Prospect Park. The last car in the park was actually written by TA's former executive director, Paul Steely-White. An old Mustang convertible. If you have to have a last car in the park, it might as well be driven by Transportation Alternatives, right? You know, we talk about these big ideas of streets for people. Most people aren't able to really imagine what that means.
Or to have the tenacity to stick with the idea, though, right? It's a fleeting thought. Oh, you know, it'd be really nice if I didn't have to contend with cars here, but then actually to stick with it. And I think that that's really speaks to the importance of having an organization like Transportation Alternatives, where it's kind of keeping that, and people can come and go, and to be able to stick to a campaign and have an organized thought on it is pretty powerful.
You need people who can share a vision, right, of what's possible in the city. You should live in a place, your child and your aging parents can thrive. They can walk across the street, they can age in place. The alternative has been what car companies have been selling, really lying to people about since they were brought into this world. Henry Ford said it was the freedom of movement drives human progress. Yes, but that freedom is not free. It's $10,000 a year that you have to pay in car-related payments. Think about every single community where if you don't have a car, you don't have access to anything.
Freedom for those that can afford it.
Right, and the truth is that most people can't afford it. So many families are crippled and they're car poor.
When their car costs as much as their apartment, or sometimes even more, you know, remove that from the budget and very quickly you're economically stable. I think that's the thing though, people often don't recognize what it actually takes to make these things happen. Behind the scenes work, how sometimes there's campaigns that last decades, like this Central Park.
People have to fight for a very, very long time to get even the simplest of infrastructure. You know, we're not even talking about the known and most deadly corridors in the city, where there's so much data and there are people who are killed and injured on a regular basis, and still at that point the city's not acting. All of our cities, we live in a place where there's a piecemeal approach to transportation. And so it means that as advocates, we too often have to fight trench warfare on McGinnis Boulevard, on Fordham Road, on 5th Avenue, on 6th Avenue. Each of them are viewed as sort of a separate ecosystem, as opposed to, like in Copenhagen, we're going to put people first. If you're a transportation planner in Tampa and you come to New York, this is the greatest thing you've ever seen. We have options, there are ways that you can get around, we have bike share. But if you come from Copenhagen, it's like, you know, Dante's second circle of hell. It's great that Central Park is car-free, but how do you actually get here with a bike? There's so many challenges with connection, especially east-west. So a big focus has been looking at places like 5th Avenue and 6th Avenue of bringing bike infrastructure so that you can actually get here safely from other places. We're not at a place where you can get anywhere, especially across Manhattan, on protected bike infrastructure. But these are some of the places where, this is, I guess, a protected horse lane. But yeah, it's working out. We have a campaign that's called Park to Park that we've been focusing on transportation alternatives, which is specifically that, looking especially around the boundary of the park and figuring out how do you create more protected ways to get people to and from.
Make things more accessible to not just the hardcore bicyclist, which historically New York has been okay for that, perhaps, but...
Because this is a wonderful New York scene of a cop car and then a huge illegal truck parked in the bike lane. This is the wonder of when infrastructure meets implementation or usage or enforcement or lack thereof. New Yorkers really been on the forefront of automated enforcement, and these are using cameras and other technology really to change behavior more than anything else. So we have a speed safety camera, and they're set up around school zones. If you're speeding, it'll send you a speeding ticket, and that ticket is $50. We have red light cameras, although they're only on 1% of our intersections, bus lane cameras, and then we need things like bike lane cameras, so that when you have a huge truck from Pennsylvania, thank you Pennsylvania, with your big semi, which is illegal, by the way, to operate those types of vehicles.
When they're that large, right?
They're that large.
There's many intersections they can't cross through and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
All the time they get stuck in the intersection, cause all sorts of trouble. So you mentioned Janette Sadik-Khan. We're on this parking protected bike lane, one of the things that she piloted. She really, I think, worked in a lot of ways in tandem with TA. I mean, did you know her?
I've been in this role now for almost 4 years. So obviously I've known and read about Janette since I've been doing this work in other cities. She and the Bloomberg administration and her team did some of the hardest work, which was getting from 0 to 1.
It's not just something on paper. It's beyond that at that point, right?
And we're on our way to Times Square, but you can look at Prospect Park West, even Citi Bike. There's so much incredible infrastructure that every New Yorker is seeing the benefit of, and it really goes back to this bold leadership. And in some ways, New York is a town that pursues big, bold ideas, and in some cases, I mean, it sounds crazy to say now, but the bike almost seemed too crazy for New York. Ed Koch tried to bring bike lanes. He also threatened to rip them up out of Midtown. New York has this love and hate relationship with bikes, and then under Janette and under Mayor Bloomberg, you really had America's lead startup city on transportation and biking.
In 2009, Janette Sadik-Khan proposed closing Broadway to cars from 42nd Street to 47th Street and turning it into a quarter-mile-long pedestrian plaza.
It started just with some traffic cones and some beach chairs, and it's really become a model for other cities to try things out. You can reimagine them, test it, measure it.
And I would say one of the things that we've seen since then is that despite all of the incredible success and how hard it is to get from 0 to 1, New York is a shitty startup.
Yeah.
We have all of these incredible things that we've done. Busway on 14th Street, Car Free Central Park, Citi Bike, and yet still you look at them, and no matter how successful they are and how people all over the world come to see them, in too many cases there's one of them, or two of them, or three of them. If we have a busway that works on 14th Street, why don't we have it on every busway across New York? Protected bike infrastructure that works, why don't we have it everywhere? We have Citi Bike, you still can't access it in all of the boroughs. Thank you. Now we're getting cut off by a bus running the red. We've been really good as a pilot city, as a startup city, and now there's an incredible opportunity to scale, right? And to bring what already works everywhere. So to even bring a new idea here, now you don't have to take the mayor or a council member to Copenhagen or bring Jan Gehl here to walk around. You need to bring somebody on the subway or on a bike 5 or 10 minutes in a different direction to see what's here and already working. It's no longer learning from others. It's taking the data and the research that we have and just simply scaling it. Outside of your house, a car is the largest purchase you'll ever make. What our cities and the car companies have basically said is that to be an American is that you are entitled to have the largest SUV and to be able to park it for free wherever you want. Changing that mentality, of course you can have a car to get around, but that car shouldn't be a 9,000-pound Hummer.
Right.
And that if you live in a place like New York that has 3 million free parking spaces, you should actually pay for parking, and those resources should go to support other things. We're sort of in the center of what, I don't know what a smaller sewer is called, but this was sort of the center of car sewer. 90% of the space was devoted to cars and 89% of the usage was pedestrians.
And people now can be and exist and enjoy, and it's not just a passing through sort of thing.
I mean, one of the things that you see in New York, and you see elsewhere, we have so failed in our transportation policy in terms of design that we actually now have to hire individuals, and God bless them for doing this work, who stand in intersections telling people what to and not to do because our design has been so broken. We're swimming in cars. And so you have these people standing there trying to negotiate and yell at people not to run people over. I mean, it's the same with the crossing guards outside of our kids' school. So now it gets a little bit quieter. We're just about a block or two off of Times Square. And you'll start to see, again, these wonderful pockets of infrastructure that's built for people, to the point that there's even a do not enter sign up there for cars.
Considering the fact that such a low percentage of people that live here actually own cars, it's kind of strange that it would be a fight at that point.
It really all comes down to leadership. These are all Mayor Adams streets. And if Mayor Adams said, how do I think of asphalt as an asset to help me with economic recovery, to help with climate goals, to help address equity, to address housing. All of this is real estate that's currently more or less a failed asset. Certainly we need streets to move around, but do we need so many? Do they need to be so wide? The open restaurant program, which came up during COVID, which was to convert parking spaces into areas where restaurants could stay open, that program alone saved 100,000 jobs. We can go back up to the place on Broadway and sit.
Yeah, wherever you're at, yeah.
Do you want to sit with like the bouncy castle? It's kind of a fun non-bike streets for everybody.
So it's called like pedestrianizing? What's the phrase for this? When you take this space and you give it back to the pedestrian?
Yeah, look, I mean, other than reforesting the city, this is kind of the closest we'll get in an urban environment to giving the space back to people, and even in little ways of giving it back to nature. What's really nice about this is, in the cases, for example, when you had open streets during COVID, streets were open up to people and shut down to cars or with more limited access, but it was still just a street. And so people would go out and say, okay, great, well, there are no cars, but maybe I'll play a game with my kids, but what am I supposed to do with it? And here, you give people an invitation, places to sit, there's things to eat, there's ping pong, there's a huge bouncy castle. When you give people space and you put even a little bit of programming, people will flock to it. So this is where you start to have what the elements of success can look like about taking street space, giving it to people. When you think about the entire ecosystem, it's good for New York, tourists who are going to come and be here, especially because we're so close to the train station. You have local businesses that are thriving. You have people who work around here. So these are the really wonderful examples of what happens, what's possible. So now just imagine this smaller or larger on every block in New York.
It's so easy for other people to take that for granted though, right? Like I grew up on Long Island. We have more space than we know what to do with there, right? And I often don't really appreciate it because it's not really limited.
Everybody in New York is seeking additional space for something. We launched a campaign called 25 by 25. And the idea was we have 76% of our public spaces devoted to the movement and storage of cars. What if we got the mayor to convert only 25% of that by 2025? The majority of the space would be devoted to cars, but just think of what you could do. I mean, we could have more than a dozen Central Parks worth of space in the city, and having that be accomplished means that on every block, you could have secure bike parking. It means you could have a place to sit outside. It means you could have...
Please secure bike parking, please.
And not only secure bike parking, but you could also have protected bike lanes.
Yeah.
You could go to work, or you could take your kids to work.
I think that people want this, but not everybody hears that people want this. So I'm gonna ask you, watching this right now, just like comment, tell people, voice that. Join transportation alternatives, join in a unified way to be able to enjoy these things. It's such a big deal, and I think we can easily take it for granted.
The city is wonderful in many ways, but it really provides a disingenuous invitation just to simply cross the street or to ride a bike. And the streets are just one microcosm, but they're a large one because you have to be a pedestrian to walk to get into your car. Whether you're driving, we have the worst traffic in the nation, you're paying $10,000 in car-related payments. You're riding a bus, we have the slowest buses in the nation. 25% of subway stations are inaccessible. Bike infrastructure that doesn't touch the entire city. So we have this hope. We just need a political leadership that's willing to take what works and bring it to everybody.
That's a big part of the mission of transportation alternatives, the idea of actually truly serving the people that exist here. It's, of course, we're talking about bike infrastructure and walkable places and biking, public transit. These are a little plug for the T-shirt available on transalt.org. It's just about creating a place that's more livable, that's more enjoyable, that's more economically feasible. How economically unfeasible it is to do this. right here, you know, at least for the general population.
Now it comes to the point of we're going to keep fighting. We have big campaigns ahead. We have big visions of what we want to do. On McGinnis Boulevard in Brooklyn, which has been so incredibly deadly, and you have a school teacher who was killed recently, which brought so much of the community together, finally demand that the city would redesign the project. You shouldn't have to have children die or school teachers die and then basically have the mayor decide whether or not this project should happen. I mean, we're at a place now in this city and others, we're having a referendum around safety. You know, most other agencies don't come in and say, do you want a fire station in your neighborhood or not? Do you want this road to continue here, or should we just stop the road? You have to park and then walk and buy a new car 5 blocks down and keep driving. That doesn't happen, but with transportation infrastructure, we have somehow allowed this to take place.
A lot of people are oftentimes confused and surprised to learn that streets are actually not built to be safe. That's not like one of the main modes. I mean, of course it's a consideration, but like one of the main focuses, generally speaking, is actually just the flow of traffic, vehicular traffic. And safety is, generally speaking, an afterthought. Now, many other more developed countries, I could say, the idea that we're a less developed country, we are in many ways. Right. They're considering that, and they're looking at things like Vision Zero and saying that, you know what, it's actually possible to build infrastructure that is safe for all road users.
When you look across all of the user groups in New York, nobody is thriving. We have the worst traffic in the nation. The goal of advocates and the goal of transportation policy isn't to say, oh, car-free city. We're all going to operate here on feed and ride around on unicorns and bicycles and buses. That's not a reality. The reality is that 76% of our space is devoted to the movement and storage of private vehicles. Most of them are operated by just one person getting around. Let's give them less space. They can still operate, they can still move around, but they have the majority of our public space. And let's give more space for options so that you also, who have a car, can view yourself as a multimodal individual. Because right now, as a New Yorker, you probably are. You're walking, you're taking the bus, you're taking the subway, and all of those things are failing. By making all of these other things better, it also means that your situation when you drive will be better, and you'll have other options to get around as well.
People often say, I don't bike, or I don't walk, or I don't take the subway. They really identify in that just definite black or white scenario. But if you go beyond that and actually challenge it with, if it was safer to bike, would you bike? You know, if it was safer to walk, if things were more accessible, if the subways were a little bit more reliable, I would encourage everyone to kind of think like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can move differently, you know.
And if I can look to the camera, hi, I'm Danny. We've been talking for a while now. I would tell you, wherever you are, just, you know, don't do what we've done. Do something more radical, do something different, do something that works for your community. Come in New York and build something completely different. We need so many new tools and approaches. Whether you want to approach this through the environment or through social justice or through older adults or through kids, we just need more people in this space pursuing a vision and using whatever tactics are necessary to get there.
What about people that are not in New York? What do you see as like opportunities for others to perhaps like do similar things, to organize?
Look, I mean, it all starts with learning. I mean, you have to learn some of the basics of this work, what other cities do. I mean, I spend my time learning the details of procurement policy in another city, or even looking at treatments of bike infrastructure and how to do it cheaper, faster, who's doing it. It's looking at organizations, whether they're in your city or around, how are they approaching this work? Yeah. And it really just starts with learning, asking questions, and reaching out to other advocates. It's about learning, it's about new ideas, and it's also not to be in a space where you say, oh, they did it and it didn't work before. It's why didn't it work and what would we do differently? New York is not going to pave over our rivers, although I'm sure you probably have some people who would like to build more highways. Yeah. So we're not going to make more space. So we have to do a better job with the space we have, and that's the same no matter where you live.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is other cities that are doing it well.
Boston.
Yeah.
Boston is a city to watch. Mayor Wu, you know, she gets it as an urbanist. The team she's put in place. DC has a lot of great projects that are coming up. I'm actually excited what's happening in LA. There, Santa Monica, you have some really interesting projects that are coming up.
It's a challenging place out there.
I mean, again, there's hope. Hope. This is hope. Bouncy Castle is hope, and all the kids who are frolicking on it. You know, hope is where you actually see what decades of advocacy, grassroots advocacy, is able to deliver when you actually have the leadership that's willing to do it. This is a great example of what a mess New York is. When you build the infrastructure, it's not just that people will come, it's that it changes behavior. It makes conditions safer, but also it encourages people to use it in the right way. Again, if you look at Prospect Park West in Brooklyn, the construction of a protected bike lane reduced people riding on the sidewalk by 90%. So this is another interesting example where you have the infrastructure, the way it's come together. Here you have the public space, you have the bike lanes, Shake Shack, of course. Especially as we make our way towards Union Square, you'll have much more of this pedestrianized space. See how much it changes? See, it's just sort of
the
in a block.
sound too, right?
Yeah. Bike infrastructure, space for people. New York City is still thriving. There are humans on the side. Businesses are open. New York still works.
So we've spoken about biking, spoke about walking,
Yes.
spoke a little bit about public transit.
Yes.
But we're going to see one of the really important public transit projects right here.
We're heading up now on the 14th Street busway. And the impetus of this was when they were considering shutting down the L train. And so the idea here was you'd create kind of a dedicated bus-only route that would help to address what was expected of, the sort of L apocalypse.
And basically the L train was damaged during Hurricane Sandy, and then basically they were figuring that really the only way to repair it at that time was to shut it down.
Yes, thank you for adding that important context.
Tens of thousands of people depended on that train every day.
It goes from Manhattan into Brooklyn. And so this was an idea, which was to take 14th Street, which was also one of the slowest busways in New York. And so what you'll see now is a place where there are mostly buses. Cars can still use it, but they're not allowed to go through. The streets are painted and you have more space and you have bulb outs now to move the bus stops out. And again, this is a project where it has worked so incredibly well here, and yet we still have to fight tooth and nail to bring it to other areas. These are shared streets that we're going to go on. Cars can still get through, but this is really more of a shared street that's focused on bike parking, bike share. They make it basically a slow street. It's less for, you're kind of racing between places, and it's more for through traffic.
It's not always about speed limits or enforcement. Really, it's best to design a street for slower speeds as opposed to...
Yeah, design for what you want. You want people to speed and people to get killed and injured, then build highways and throughways that run through the center of residential neighborhoods. You want where people actually can live and thrive in a place.
Yeah.
These businesses are open, they're able to get the things that they need. Customers still come.
Yeah. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Danny, thanks so much for joining us. It's been really great to hear some of your perspective and experience on these different things.
Come join us, whether you're in New York or elsewhere. Find your local transportation advocacy group and get involved. Whether it's getting on the email list, showing up at a meeting, making a donation. I mean, it really does take a village to change our cities, and come get in the fight. We could use you, so thank you.
Let's do this. All right. So.
This happens all the time. The angry driver in New York that starts honking at you to race to a red light that you eventually get you get there faster than they do. So there you go, yellow van. Here we are waiting with you.